Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the home theater geek. Welcome to AVS Forum Tech Talk. As always, I'm joined by my cohort in the background, my technical director, Chris Mata. Hey, Chris, how you doing?
Doing well.
Hey,
Glad to be here.
I'm always glad to have you here. This is you have a YouTube channel called That Home Theater Dude.
Indeed, yeah, I do.
Indeed, you do, and great videos on that YouTube channel. So I encourage everybody to go check it out. Absolutely,
Thanks for the endorsement.
of course. So this week's guest is a good friend of mine, has been for many, many years, Anthony Grimani, who is the co-founder of Grimani Systems, makers of speakers, and PMI Engineering, makers of acoustic treatments, and also a very well-respected home theater designer. Hey, Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hi, Scott. It's good to be here. How are you
I'm
doing?
I'm doing great, man. Hope you had a good holiday.
I did. I
And
did.
here we are at the verge of 2023 and CES coming down the pike, all kinds of stuff like that. But before we get there, this is the last show of 2022, actually, and I'm really happy to have you here to talk about, um, in particular, room acoustics and and its relationship to room EQ. And we call this, I guess, tuning, right? Room tuning. We want the room to sound as good as possible. And there are sort of two ways to approach it, either with acoustic treatments or equalization or both. So, what I'm sure you must use both approaches as necessary. Let's talk about that.
Right. Well, at the conclusion of this live stream podcast,
Mm-hmm.
I am hoping to prove to you that what you really need is both. I sound like a lawyer, huh? Um, you take a perfectly good speaker made by a perfectly good manufacturer, you put it in a room, and the room's basically going to change its sound from what it was supposed to be in many different ways, and every room's going to change it differently. And what you need to do if you want to actually I like to say get the best out of your investment, get a return on your investment, is to do things to the room acoustical envelope that you're putting around the speaker, and then tune the speaker to basically custom tailor it to the room. And there's parts here and parts there, and some things don't overlap, some things do, and we're going to talk about that for the next hour.
Yes, exactly. And before we get into it, I want to mention that I'm watching the comment section. Those of you who are watching live can post questions and comments as we go, and I will curate them, of course, and pass along the ones that are appropriate. For example, Pose Acoustic says, "Come on, Anthony, can't I just use the best EQ and ditch any room acoustics?"
If you use a really good EQ that's all made out of a golden enclosure with gold-plated cables, and like little blinking blue lights on the front, that's all you need if you like it.
Yeah, well,
That was
I,
being sarcastic. Thank you, Matthew, for your question. Um, we're going to keep saying the ultimately, to get to what I often call audio nirvana, you need some amount of equalization, and you need some amount of acoustical treatment, and you need to put the right speakers in the right place. And I'm going to show you with some of the 80 different diagrams I have on a presentation ready, only some of them.
Only some
I'm
of
going to
them,
show
yeah.
you why. Yeah.
That almost reminds me of the song. You remember the song Alice's Restaurant?
Yeah.
With the 47 diagrams of the So we're gonna show you some diagrams here for sure, but not that many.
And
Anyway,
that's right up the road from kind of where you live now, right?
Alice's Restaurant. That's
Yeah,
right.
that's right.
It's just up in Berkeley, actually. I believe.
I've heard that it's on the ridge at the top of the hill of
Oh,
where you are.
In the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? You're right. You're right. That's exactly right. And I'm right now in Santa Cruz, loving life in my new home. So that's awesome. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about room acoustics and room correction. So you can't say which one matters more, can you? They're both equally important.
They're both equally important. Correct. Yeah. Absolutely.
Right. So get us into the discussion here. I know you've got some introductory images to show us, and
Let's go to my slides.
let's go to the slides.
So, home cinema tuning, acoustical treatments, or room EQ? About me. This is me, Anthony Grimani. Like you said, I have a speaker company called Grimani Systems. I have an engineering and design company called PMI Engineering. I also have a company that makes and sells acoustical treatments under the brand Dimension 4 and Sonatus. I have a degree in electrical engineering. I spent 5 years at Dolby, 10 years at THX. 23 years ago, I decided to go off on my own, start my own company, and I counted it up. I've actually been doing this for 40 years now.
Wow.
I started young.
Indeed.
But there it is. So we are obviously here to talk about getting good sound quality. We're not here to talk about coffee at Alice's restaurant or bad sound quality. We're here to talk about good sound quality. And ultimately, I'll summarize it down to, hey, what you hear when you're sitting in the room is the direct response from hopefully a good speaker. You're also hearing the sounds that bounce off the walls and the ceiling and the floor and furnishings around the room. And that combination of what goes into your ears and then excites your brain. So you want all that to be good. Now, to be good, you got to take control of it. So taking control means you want to pick the right speakers, you want to put them in the right place, and you want to have the right energy lighting up the room, and you want to tune it all correctly. That's what we're going to talk about. So, first off, what does a room do to your speaker? So imagine you just bought the best speaker in the world. You know, there's many manufacturers that say, we make the world's best speaker. You bring that speaker home, you take it out of its box. What's it going to do? So you're going to hook it up to a system, which I've simplified here to a source device that is connected to a preamp decoder, hopefully through some kind of equalization stage into power amps. And generally today, as of a certain even median level, the quality of that signal is well under control. You can, for a pretty moderate price, you can get an electronic signal coming out of a power amp that's quite good.
Yeah.
And then you feed that to a speaker and it radiates sound out into the room. And that is often out of control. The way the sound bounces around the room, how the relationship between the direct sound and the reflected sounds interact, and all kinds of things just mess up the sound. A way to look at it is that if you have a good direct sound from a speaker that's well designed, by the time all the reflections come back from the room, it'll cloud up the sound more and more and more to where you potentially end up with a royal mess. So that royal mess results in a blurring of the image and the sound stage, whatever you want to call it. I mean, ultimately, when it's all working right, you hear clearly where there are sounds in the sound stage as put in there by the mixer or the film director or the sound designer, depending what title they have. And if the interaction between the speaker and the room is not controlled, you end up with this mush that looks like a dark black cloud. Not good. So now here's a funny little thing. Most people don't know this. Did you know that at the main seat of most listening rooms, 12, 13, 14 feet away, and which is 3, 4, 5 meters for you guys who are outside the country here and talking in the metric system.
Indeed. We're talking 3, 4, 5 meters between the speaker and the listener.
Sure.
Yeah.
And at that seat position, there is actually more reflected sound energy that's bounced around the room going into your ear canal than the one little solo sound vector coming from the speaker to you. And that's really important in thinking about the importance of what the room is doing to your speakers at low frequency, mid frequency, and high frequency. Just if you guys remember only one thing from all the words I put out, is that ultimately what's going into your ear canal and therefore exciting all your little nerve endings in here and going to your brain is more waves of energy coming from the reflected field of the room than there is directly from the speaker. Pretty crazy.
It is kind of crazy. And it brings up a concern that I've had for a long time in terms of speaker reviews, right? So you have these, you and I both know a lot of people who review speakers, and they write a review and they say it sounds good or it doesn't sound good, but they're their experience of it is so dependent upon the room in which they are doing the review
Yeah.
that may have nothing to do with the room that the buyer, that the reader of the review says, oh, this is a good speaker, I'll go buy that speaker. They put it in their room, and it's a completely different experience.
So that brings up a digression. I'll come back to it a little later on the slides.
Okay.
What's really interesting, absolutely what you said is totally true. However, a group of researchers years and years and years ago said, well, can we actually come up with the idea of a standardized listening room, something that corresponds to the average of what people have at home? And there is an IEC, International Electrotechnical Commission standard for a standard listening room, something that puts you, everybody's room is going to be different, but there is an actual bell curve average, and a reviewer could actually build up a room or have a room and tune it to the IEC I'm spacing it. It's the 28026. Oh my God, I forget. But there is a standard.
Some string of numbers, right? Okay.
Some string of numbers, 20266. Maybe Matthew Pose, if he's still online, can remind me of what that is. So that's kind of cool. And this is not new. This has existed for a long time now. We're going back 30 years ago where that was figured out. Another thing that was figured out is what kind of reverb environment, how many sound reflections should you have in a room? I'm going to talk about that much later, so that the sound is good. And that's what's built into the IEC 2068. I can't remember room.
XYZ, so, right.
If a reviewer was really serious about the work they were doing with loudspeakers, they should read that document and do whatever they can in their listening room to emulate that. By the same token, a good speaker designer is going to have a listening room in their factory or their engineering center that is on that IEC standard, so that they can actually listen to the character of that speaker in a standardized listening room, which puts them 268.13. Thank you, Jimmy. I think there's another little thing in there, but whatever. Sorry, my kids were screaming when you asked the question to me.
Yeah, Matt's kids were screaming at him.
The kids were screaming, what? Like the dog ate your homework. Anyway, that's kind of cool. Now,
okay, we're going to talk about that. Next
little thing is there are ways to design speakers so that they're less room dependent. There are speakers that are very dependent on the acoustical character around them, and there are speakers that are less dependent. And an enormous body of work was done. I always mention him in my presentations, by Dr. Floyd Toole and his acolytes. About how do you design a speaker that sounds good in more rooms? And there's a bunch of different rules and guidelines to the recipe for how to do that. And it's called sound power. And there's ways to design a speaker so that a reviewer in one room puts out or gets an impression that's more like what you get in your room. Anyway,
would that mean that there's more sound being directed toward the listener and less being spread out in the room? Is that one of the criteria, perhaps?
Interestingly enough, that was an old thinking. I like to say there was a time where we used to think we lived on this flat disk and you ran off the edge and dragons came to eat you.
That's more like flat Earth theory. Okay.
Yeah. And this is not new stuff. I'm going to say going back as far as 30 years ago, Dr. Toole and the people that worked with him at the National Research Council in Canada codified that actually what's better is to have what's called constant directivity or even sound power. So what's more important than how much you're focusing the sound at the listener is that the sound that's going towards you is very similar to the sound that's going off 20 degrees off axis and 30 degrees and 40, so that the net bubble of sound, the energy, I feel very Italian here. I am Italian. Come on.
Totally cool.
The main idea is that the main bubble of sound energy that's going in the room be as smooth and constant as possible. And so what that does is that the sound from the loudspeaker to you and the sound reflecting off the wall has a very similar pattern. And then your brain can actually go, okay, well, so I got this pattern coming from the speaker, and then I got this other pattern coming just a little later from a different place. It's exactly the same pattern. I'll ignore it. A speaker, and it's funny, I have slides on this, but I'm going by hand here. I'm going a cappella. Don't ask me to sing.
That's
A
good.
speaker that has a radiation to the wall that's different than the direct sound. So like
Yeah.
that looks like this, maybe has a pattern like that. Well, it comes back off the wall like this. And then your brain's like, well, I got this direct sound from the speaker. And then I got this slightly different sound from coming from over here. I think it's the same thing reflected, but I'm not quite sure.
Right.
And that's sort of a simple way that I can explain the machinations of psychoacoustics that are going on.
Mhm.
The better sounding speakers, and this is shown in the work by that group. I
Mhm.
sometimes refer to it as the Canadian Mafia. But excellent work. Absolutely,
with
really.
Floyd Toole as the Godfather.
He is the Godfather. But he doesn't talk like this, you know?
Yeah, right.
And is that, you know, in general, in rooms that we're interested in here, we're not talking about necessarily concert halls and things like that. We're talking about
No.
listening rooms.
Yeah.
The speakers that sound better to most of the listeners are ones that have a smoothly continuous dispersion. Now,
Right.
you can focus the dispersion some amount, but it has to be equal at all frequencies, and that gets really challenging. So there's a bunch of speakers out there that have directivity, but
Yeah.
they only have it above 2 kilohertz. So that means that above 2 kilohertz, it's focusing to you, and below that, it's radiating all over. And then your ear brain is getting one thing from the direct sound and a different thing from the reflected sound that don't sound so good.
Yeah.
It sounds honky, and you brass players know exactly what
I
that's
do know
at.
exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's right.
So let's actually switch back to my presentation
Sure.
and talk about the room's thumbprint. So imagine you're in this room, which happens to be the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. Wonderful sounding room.
Wonderful hall. Yeah.
Beautiful hall. There's musicians in this room, and unless you're sitting like right down here. I don't know. Yeah, you do see that. Unless you're sitting right down here. If you're like me, I get the cheap seats because I can't afford any more than that. And the price of yours up there. You're hearing some amount of direct sound, then you're hearing all these reflections from the room, and it's very immersive. I'll use the current big buzzword. It's immersive, and it's fun to be there, and you're like you're bathing in the sound.
Right.
So there's a character to that, which is particular. Every concert hall in the world has its own character, its own overall response, and there's books and books and books and books written on that. Very interesting. If all y'all just want to read one good book, there's a guy called Ando who wrote an excellent book on concert hall acoustics. So we like sound in those rooms, but then we're going to bring it into our small room that has all these reflections that have their reflection thumbprint. And if we don't do something to that thumbprint, it's going to make that while we're trying to get this character to the sound, all we're going to get, our brain's going to just be locked into, yeah, but I know I'm listening to something in Concertgebouw, I'm listening to Mahler's Third or something, long piece. And it all sounds like it's the size of the room, and it's hard to transcend from your listening room right to Amsterdam and be in the place, and that's wrong. And so we don't want the sound field to be room limited. And the way we're going to do that is to control and to basically take control of those sound reflections so that they don't tell your brain so much about what's going on in the room. And now you can believe. Room EQ will not do that. Room EQ cannot break the acoustical thumbprint of your small room and neutralize it so that you can actually believe you are in a concert hall or in a space shuttle where there's natural ambience. Out in space, remember, there's no sound, zero, nada.
That's right.
But
in space, no one can hear your speaking.
No one can hear. Let's look at this a little more. So here's a room in which one may have tried to just do room equalization and no treatments. And I'm showing this from the top. Here's a 7-channel system, 3 fronts, 2 sides, 2 backs. The center speaker lights up. There's a sound. There's a direct sound from the center speaker. And then there are some reflections off the side wall. This is just more of what I already showed, but there's a reflection that didn't make it to your head. It actually passed it because it's 10 degrees off axis. And it bounced off the back wall, the front wall, the side wall, back to the back wall. And after a bunch of bounces, it finally reaches you. Here's a reflection at 20 degrees. Here's a reflection off at 30 degrees, 40 degrees, etc., etc., etc. That's my best Latin. Anybody take Latin in school? So there's a bunch of red arrows. That's just the right side. And if you add in the left side, there's a bunch more arrows.
Holy
So
smokes.
there's a lot of reflected energy, and chaos will reign if you don't take some level of control of that.
And
Now,
EQ is not going to do anything to help this.
so EQ's not, how can EQ eliminate those reflections?
It can't.
It can't. Now, EQ can mitigate some of the effects of the reflections, and I'm going to show you that later.
Okay.
Let's just say that in looking at those reflections, there's two effects. One of them is that the sound has bounced around so much that your brain sort of overloaded, like, man, where's my violin? Where's my saxophone? I know there's too much sax and violins on TV today, but where are those? So you're your brain's just trying to untangle all that. So one thing is that the saxophone is bounced around 50 times and you're trying to still hear through that. That's one thing. Second thing is that the sound of the saxophone is now layered with an overall reverberation thumbprint. And that thumbprint may have a tonal character to it. It may emphasize the bass, or it may emphasize the mids, it may emphasize the highs, and every room's a little different.
Mm-hmm.
You can equalize out that emphasis, and I'm going to show you that later.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the point at which I will say, and I'm going to show you that later, that I have been brought to try to reduce the malaise, the bad character that a room has done without the use of treatments. It's like, nope, try to make these speakers sound good, and you can't put anything on the walls. I'm like, wow, okay. So you try,
Yeah.
They brought you over. I'm the guy that, hangs by the red light that says, we'll do acoustics work for money. We'll work for money. And I'll go try it. And I have been surprised by how, with careful and meticulous tuning of equalization, doing some stuff in the frequency domain and some things in the time domain, using high quality digital equalize, I've been surprised that the pair of speakers or the sound system that's completely sucked when I got there, after some equalization and no acoustical treatment, it sucked less. Okay, and
well, that's good.
And it sucked less enough that the dialogue's clear. I can hear some things. It sounds like I can sort of enjoy some music in here, and I can actually hear some three-dimensional immersion from here, whereas before it was just a complete mush.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not endorsing the fact that EQ only is a way to go, but I'm saying that if that's all that you can do, you can actually advance from really bad sound to reasonable sound with EQ only.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can do both, and that's really what I want to convince you, it gets a little bit better. Now, I want to put something to bed here. This is confusing because it's like, well, there's all these sound reflections, but I still hear the sound coming from my center speaker. Why is that? Even though I said that the reflections dominate, in fact, there's sometimes 3 times more reflected energy going into your ear canal than the direct sound. How is it that you still hear the sound coming from the center speaker?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea? Anybody know? How's that happen?
I would say it gets there first.
It gets there first, exactly. We have this process in our ear brain scheme that is sometimes codified as the Haas effect, named after the German researcher Dr. Haas, who kind of put some information out on that, sometimes known as precedence effect. So our ear brain's like this 3-dimensional radar that's trying to figure out where sounds come from. If it finds consistency of patterns, but notices that this was the direction where the sound first hit us, and then there's another one coming from over there and over there, we go, that's where the sound's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
That is what saves our derrière. That's French for our heinies. When in prehistoric times we were chased by velociraptors,
right?
We would hear them come from over there, and even if there was a reflection off a big rock over there, we go, it's over there. Now we all know that with velociraptors, you were done. They were so fast, forget about it.
And they were quiet.
Yeah, so that's a bad example.
Not to mention the fact that they're separated from humans by 65 million years.
Well, correct, exactly. Insert name of other predator here.
Right? Saber-toothed tiger, perhaps.
Saber-toothed tiger.
And they can be loud.
So that's how come even in quite a reverberant space with 3 or 4 times more energy coming back from the reflections, we still hear the sound comes from there.
Right.
It takes brain power.
It got there first.
It got there first. So The reflection patterns do need to be consistent for that to happen really well. So that means you want a speaker that's radiating into the room very evenly, and that
As
the
you were talking
reflection
about before, right?
right. But it does take brain power, and it's fatiguing after a while. I mean, those of us who are a little older, like Scott and I, when you go
Yeah.
into a room that's reverberant and you try to like hold a conversation, in a restaurant or other place, after a while you're like, can we just get out of here?
Yeah, really.
Young people have an easier time
Yeah.
at this than us old folks,
Yep.
but
Yep.
it is fatiguing. It takes
Yep.
brain power.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm not going to talk about this. We don't have time for this. So what do we do about all this? So equalization can help. Absorption of this reflected sound can help, but it has to be the right type. Scattering of the reflected sound can help. And all of those solutions need to be put in place. Now, big warning. I'm sure the audience here has all heard about damping panels, absorption panels. Sometimes people call them dampening, which is actually not the right word in English. Dampening is putting water on something, and
Correct.
speakers do not put water on walls; they put sound.
It's
but
damping.
Damping. So there are people who take the approach is like, well, if sound reflections are bad, I'll just layer the walls, with thick fiberglass, rock wool, or other absorptive materials. I'll just hang all my, spare mattresses over there and it'll be fine. And that's wrong. You don't want to do that. You want to preserve a certain amount of sound reflection in the room. Humans expect some reflections. Eliminating them all is bad. You end up with like, huh?
Well, that'd be like setting up your listening room as an anechoic chamber.
Correct.
Which would be, I mean, anyone who's been in an anechoic chamber knows that they sound really strange. Well, they don't sound like anything at all, and that's really strange.
That's very strange. And so the post says, I like my sound a little wetter. So the term wet, dry and wet are used in describing the amount of reflections in a room. Dry being it's very dead. The absorption is very high. Wet means not that you've been dampening the room. I think that's the joke he was putting it. Wet means there's a little more reflection. So let's talk about that. Much further in my presentation, I have this interesting concept, which is, well, what do people like? What do I like? What do you like? I'll just say that a bunch of researchers went down the rabbit hole on this about 30 years ago to figure out, well, what do people like for the amount of reflection in a room? Like how much sound energy do they like? And they actually found by testing many listeners in many different rooms, listening to many different types of program material, that there's a statistically relevant bell curve where most people tended to like a certain amount of reflection energy in a room. And it depended on the room size. A smaller room, actually in your direction, a smaller room needed to have a less amount of reflection for the people to go, yeah, that sounds good. And this is by listening to loudspeakers, listening to different types of music on loudspeakers. So smaller room, a less amount of reflection energy, mid-sized room more, and a large room more. Interesting. And it is codified in reflection decay time. It's not codified in amount of reflection because it's a little difficult to measure, to like get a weight of amount of reflection. How many pounds of molecules of air of reflection. We don't do that.
Well, we often hear people talk about RT, reflection or reverb time, but you're talking about reflection decay time.
Right. So this is interesting. Let's go back to the fact that most of the world of acoustics is concerned with big rooms, rooms that are at least 150, 200 feet long. And in those rooms, you can actually define a thing called the reverberation, which is after the sound has left the source, whether it's, me playing the guitar loud or you playing your horn loud, it passes the listener and then it bounces around the room. And it reverberates to a point where it doesn't have an echo character. It's just, that's reverberation. And it's measured in those rooms as the time it takes for the energy to decay down 60 decibels, which is like basically down to nothing, down to 0.1% of the original sound of you playing your horn.
Right. That's called RT60. Right?
RT60. And it's the same concept for small rooms. The thing is that in small rooms, you never really get to a point where the sound is reverberated, where it's like the statistically random wash of sound. So in order to acknowledge that, we tend to talk in reflection decay time. So how long does it take for the sound to decay down 60 seconds, even though it's never gotten to
60
reverb?
dB, you mean?
60 dB, sorry.
Yeah.
So in small rooms, just to be accurate, we call it RDT, reflection decay time. And so it's codified that way, not in the amount of reflection, because there's no way to measure an amount of reflection. It's codified in time, which is the same effect. And so a small room, maybe 200 square feet, is going to sound good with the RDT being about 0.2 seconds. A mid-sized room, somewhere around 300 to 400 square feet, is going to sound good with the reflection decay time being 0.3 seconds. And a large room, maybe 600 square feet, that's 60 square meters, by the way, is going to sound good with the reflection decay time being somewhere on 0.5 or 0.55. What I mean by sound good is you put a pair of speakers and you play a bunch of different program material for people who like, for audio geeks like us, and you tune the room different ways until you get to that number. People are going, I like it better that way.
Right. This was from this study done of what people like in different size rooms and so on.
This is not from any math. This is basically observing what people like. Kind of like you go to the optometrist, they try different lenses on until you go, I can actually read the whole board now. So what's cool about that is that we know there's not everybody liked it exactly the same, but there's a significant statistic center to that. And that if you're designing a room for yourself, that you may as well start with that target. And I will show you the equation in a few minutes of what that target is. But it's kind of cool because you know that you don't have to stab in the dark anymore. You go, look, my room is 500 square feet. I should target a reflection decay time of about 0.3 seconds. And I'm going to get there by doing this, which we'll talk about later.
Right. By the way, Pose Acoustics says small rooms will have inaudible reflections before the mix of reflections is a stochastic reverberant field. What do you think of that?
So that is correct. And actually in acoustics, the people who are listening here are living in what's called small rooms in the world of acoustics.
Right.
And I know that even if your room is 30 feet long, in acoustics, it's considered a small room.
Right.
Where's the breakpoints? Different people disagree, but a large room in the world of room acoustics would be a concert hall, something that's 200 or 300 feet long. Medium room would be around 100 feet long. Small room would be 30, 40, maybe even up to 50 feet. In all of the rooms we're working in, other than if you're talking about flutter echoes where the sound bounces back and forth between two surfaces, you don't really notice the reflections because they're tightly clustered and they all fall off pretty quickly, but they do cloud up the sound. So you can't really, you don't hear them directly until you actually get rid of them and you go, whoa, that's a whole lot better. So
get rid of them to a certain degree.
To a certain degree.
Entirely.
Right. So let's go back to the presentation real quick. I pointed that we don't want to get rid of all of the reflections. Those that research showed that if the room is too dead, too dry, has too little reflections, your brain's going like, what's going on here? I see some walls around me, but it's too dead and it's just unpleasant. So what do we want? We want to put some treatments around the room, some absorbers, diffusers, stuff like that. Peter says, I feel I should switch to the speakers.
He's listening on his headphones. Depends on the room you're in, Peter.
Depends on the room. So ultimately, what I like to say is when it's all working right, the end result is you want to be able to hear the center speaker and you want reflections around the room that provide you a smooth immersion sense without detracting too much from the clarity of your center speaker. We don't want to kill all the reflections. We want to preserve some, and they have to come from different locations at the right time so that you're enveloped by this crescent of sound energy. If I was doing this in France, it would be a croissant. A lot of butter. A lot of butter. So that's what we want. Now, let's talk about this thing. We just covered this. There is an acoustic target. Research shows, it always sounds like it's a commercial. Research proves
Yes,
that
right.
the target direct to reflecting amount is about the same for most people around the world. It depends on room volume, and it's described as a reflection decay time, like I just said,
Like you talked
RDT.
about. Yep.
What's the target? Well, the target is to have some reflections, and for the decay time to be a certain target, but also the spectrum. So a lot of people only talk about the decay time, but you really want the room's reflections to support the speakers the same I laughed so hard I dropped my croissant. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. 5-second rule applies with croissants. Pick it up
Yes.
now.
Yeah, that's right.
So the decay time not only needs to be the right amount, but it needs to be consistent at the low frequency, mid frequency, and high frequency.
Mhm.
And I will show you a bunch of diagrams later of rooms I've been in where it's not constant and how much you hear that.
Mm.
So it's important that it have the right time, that there be the right amount of reflections, and that they be the same more or less at in your direction, high frequency, mid frequency, and low frequency. So here's the decay time guidelines. The decay time should be somewhere between 0.2 and 0.4 seconds for the listenership of this fine event.
Mhm.
And here's the equation.
Hey, look at that.
So
Math.
if you're all stuck in the imperial system where we celebrate the thumbs and legs and knees and body sizes of kings and
Of
queens
the
of the
kings.
past,
Yes, right.
yes. Or of the globe, actually, there's some of the things were based on like the circumference of the globe,
Right.
which doesn't apply if you're a flat earther, by the way. Is that the target time should be 0.3 times the cube root, that thing that's in parenthesis with a 1/3, that's the cube root
Yep.
of the volume of your room divided by 3,532. Okay.
Okay.
So if you have a room that's 3,532 cubic feet, which is about 22 by 16 or 17 by 9, something like that,
Mhm.
that decay time should be 0.3 because that volume of 3,532 divided by 3,532 is 1. The cube root of 1, even I know that is 1. So that's 0.3.
Right.
Now, if you live outside the United States or outside British territories, the equation is a lot easier. It's the volume of the room divided by 100,
Mhm.
0.3 times the volume of that. So now, how you get there is you start with a room and you apply some number of absorbers around the room. Don't put them all in one place. You distribute them evenly. And all you need in most rooms, assuming you've got some couches and at least a decent area rug, is to cover only 15% of the surface of your walls and ceiling with absorbers. That
Wow.
surprises people.
It does. It surprises a lot of people because you'd think I've seen plenty of theaters where they've covered the entire room, all available wall space,
Right.
with
And-
absorbers.
Right. And in a room like that, it don't sound so good. What does don't sound so good mean? Well, if you're listening to a movie, you notice that you feel like you're pointing at speakers as opposed to be immersed in speakers. There's nothing that ties them in together in the reflection sound field. And when you're listening to music, it sounds really analytical. You can't relax into the music. And your brain's going like, where's the reflections? Where's the reflections? You get used to it after a while, but it's just not right.
Not
just
ideal.
Not ideal.
Mhm.
So 15% absorption is all you need. I've got a chart here in a very linearized way. It's not a linear equation, if we can put that back up. The decay time depends on room volume. And I've reduced that volume to size, assuming that a 250 square foot room would have a 9-foot ceiling. So blah, 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 blah. But, you can look at this or calculate it. Just know that there is a target, that there is a place, there is a way. Think of this as a recipe. You can follow a recipe and it tells you how much salt, pepper, and paprika to put in there. You can put more, but chances are it's going to be too salty or too paprika-y? Paprika? I don't know. It's too paprika. Yeah, I love what you made here, but it's so paprika I can't eat it.
Right.
Now, this is important and this is important. Both of those. What I'm showing here is a change of reflection decay time over frequency. Ideally, you want to put sound out in the room from speakers that are very even and consistent, that are well designed, and you want the room to reflect the sounds back to you evenly in the bass, mid, and highs. So ideally, the diversion or the change relative to the target I showed on the earlier slide would be 0. you can actually tolerate at lower frequencies up to 100% longer time. So if the target was 0.3 seconds, you can actually let the reflection decay time rise up to 0.6 seconds without noticing it too much.
In
And
the low frequencies,
in the
like
low frequency, below
60
100
hertz.
hertz.
Yeah.
Yes, all the way up at 60 hertz. And in the high frequencies, you can also let the decay time droop down a little bit without noticing it too much. And most rooms are naturally going to rise up at the low frequency and fall off at the high frequencies just because of how reflections happen.
Right.
So getting it right is using the right amount of frictional absorptions, the right amount of base absorption. Sometimes people call them base traps. I like to call them base absorbers. And you can calculate that. Now, here's what's interesting. The calculation, there's one equation that's from the 30s from Sabine that looks like this. And I won't even describe it because I don't have time. You can go back and read it. Then there's another one from Eyring from the 50s that looks like this. Which will tell you essentially how many square meters or square feet of absorbers you got to put on the walls and ceiling and floor. The most current one, which dates from the 80s, from a researcher in the Basque area, in the Catalonia area of Spain, called Arau Puchades, is this. And if you put this in Excel, it'll actually blow up Excel. It's just too much stuff. Or you just cover the walls with about 10 to 15% of absorption.
How much easier is that?
That's a little easier. It's a little easier. We do have in-house, we do have this giant calculation sheet that allows us to figure out just what all of that is. We took years to develop it, and we use that, but it usually ends up with, that amount. Now, in addition to...
Wait, before you go on there, there's a question from Sonic Cinema. Do we need to treat the walls and corners for low frequency or just the corners?
That's a really good question. So there's a section on low frequency coming up later, and looking at the time, I know we're not going to get there, but the low frequency can be low frequency errors can be a result of two things. Either reflections, like the base frequencies are reflecting just like the mids and highs, and those get absorbed along the walls and the ceiling at the same place as all the mids and highs. And the way you deal with that is you have nice, thick absorbers. So I'm going to get to that in a second, and it's always good to repeat things. But if the absorber's too thin, like only 1 inch, 25 millimeters, it's only going to absorb the mids and highs. If you're serious about what you're doing, you want absorbers that are going to be at least 10 centimeters thick, 4 inches thick, and preferably all the way to 6 inches thick, which is 15 centimeters thick. So that they absorb well down into the mid base. The other thing that goes wrong with bass is what's called standing waves, which are resonances that get set up in the room due to the distance between the front and back wall, left and right wall, ceiling and floor, where the wave actually fits in there, and like Cinderella in their shoes, she's happy and she gets married and runs off, and it's proof that just a brand new pair of shoes will make your life great. But at those resonance frequencies, it is best to put the treatments in the corners. So those are called bass traps. They're designed to treat usually just very low frequencies. But if you do not have a standing wave problem in the room and you put a bass trap in the corner, it's not going to do anything. So you kind of have to figure out whether your bass problems are standing waves or just low frequency issues because they're just bouncing around in the room. So that's a good question. Okay. So let me see. I'm going to finish on this. So 15% of the walls with absorption. I haven't talked about it yet, but there's another class of acoustical treatments called scattering panels or diffuser panels. I like those. They do reduce the reflection decay time a little bit, but their main job is to break up the reflections so the room feels like it's bigger. Your brain knows that when there's a short reflection between the speaker and a surface, and it's not very far away, you can tell, well, the room is small. As the room gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, the reflections tend to just naturally get scattered because they're far away. Right. If you put a scattering panel on the wall, a thing that is usually shaped kind of like these weird Lego blocks all over, or they have different shapes, you fool your brain into believing that wall's a lot further away. And that's very, very cool. And they come they come in all kinds of different shapes, and different manufacturers make them. They do need to be deep.
You mentioned in the slide there, you said 2D diffusers and 3D diffusers. And I just wondered if you could quickly say what the difference is.
Absolutely. So I have slides that show this a little later. What I call a 2D diffuser is not the math of the quadratic residue equation. I call that a 2D diffuser, a device. Man, I wish I had one. Hold on one second. Hold on.
Yeah, okay.
I can't reach it. A 2D diffuser is any device that may be curve shaped or some other way that an incoming sound vector hits it and it gets scattered over a plane, what's called a hemidisc, which is a two-dimensional re-radiation.
Okay.
So that's what I call a 2D diffuser. A 3D diffuser is a device that may look like, skyline of lots of little blocks. The sound that hits that gets scattered hemispherically in 3 dimensions. And there's places to put each one of those depending on who you want to believe. What I've tried over the years is all kinds of different things, read all kinds of different books. I have bookshelves full of acoustic textbooks, and tried all kinds of different things. And I usually find that absorbers laid out around the room, and some 2D diffusers towards the front of the room, and 3D diffusers towards the back of the room works very well. Okay. And just spread them out, interleave them around the room, and you'll get to something that sounds pretty good. Last little thing.
Beatmaster asks, are full DVD and Blu-ray shelves good diffusers too?
What's a DVD?
Yeah,
Nobody uses those anymore. They do scatter, but they scatter in a they'll scatter at a very specific range of frequencies, and at other frequencies they won't scatter. So what you really want is if you can actually have shelves with books and DVDs and Blu-ray discs all at different depths, for starts just randomly, that will work. And you can actually calculate what should be that sequence. So you can do that. Books are heavier and denser, so they'll work better. Or you can actually, if you're serious about it, you can get a scattering panel for not that much money.
Right.
So, all right. A final little thing on that, and I'm going to start talking about equalization, is that asymmetrical layouts I do find work better, where you have absorbers and diffusers laid out around the room, but across the room for each other, you don't make them be exactly right in front of each other. You offset them a little bit, and that really tweaks people. It's like, what? The reflections from the left wall and right wall are going to be different? It's like, yeah, if they're actually the same, your brain starts to think that's an intended sound. It's going to feel like, wow, there's a phantom speaker coming from those reflections. If you scramble it, if you actually change the reflection pattern of the left and right wall to basically decorrelate it, it helps your brain in knowing that those are reflections. The intended sound comes from those correlated speakers over there, and everything else that's sort of scrambled are just reflections. I'll ignore them. So,
excellent. All excellent points.
All right. So let's see.
We do want to spend a little time on equalization here. I think that's where you were headed next.
Right. Actually, so let's switch back over to the presentation. I realize I've got a nice little diagram that exemplifies everything I just showed. Here is a proposed layout for where to place panels around in a room. So this pink thing is an absorber. That's a 2D diffuser. That's a 3D diffuser. So that's
the pink ones and the crosshatch ones are on the ceiling.
Right. So these are on the ceiling. Would be a reflected ceiling plan, RCP. So I'm going to suggest that by putting some absorbers in the front half of the room to get rid of that bounce off the ceiling, that's a good idea. And putting some 3D diffusers towards the back, that's a good idea. And then on the left wall, this is a proposed layout. So 3 absorbers. Only 3 absorbers. And those 3 absorbers, if you actually were to group them all towards the bottom corner of the room just to see how much room they take, you see it's like less than 20%. So 3 absorbers on the left wall, some 2D diffusers here, and some 3D diffusers towards the back. That's a layout that'll absorb some of the sound, scatter the rest of the sound, and it'll work pretty well. And you'll end up sitting here with a nice smile on your face. Right wall, here again, a few absorbers, some 2D diffusers, interleaved, some 3D diffusers towards the back. Those are the front speakers, or those are the side speakers. That works well. The back wall, generally, I like absorbing the middle part of the back wall so that the sound energy going back and forth is really sapped out, so you don't have a repeat of correlated sound hitting your ears. And then putting some diffusers to the outside, that works pretty well. And that gives us a character to the sound where there's still some reflections. There's scattered reflections, some full reflections, some absorbed energy. And you end up with the croissant au beurre that we wanted to do, the smooth immersion.
Indeed.
So let's talk about room EQ.
Let's.
Shall we? What is
we?
it for? Is it useful? Yes, it is useful. So what we want, I'm repeating this, is ultimately what we want is a good direct sound from the speaker, a good sound power from the speaker. So a speaker that has a bubble of sound that goes into the room that's even. And we want the room to support that evenly, not too much, not too little. By now, I hope you've seen in my super quick dissertation here that the room reflection should be about 15% of absorption, 15 or 20% of diffusion laid out evenly around the room. Take control of all of the above. Now, you want to start with good speakers that have a good direct sound and good sound power. It is very difficult to equalize the sound of speakers that have bad frequency response. If they start off with a bad sound power, bad frequency response, you can tune it and it sounds good on one song and the next song doesn't sound good. It sounds good on movies, but then on classical music, it doesn't sound good. And people get all these different conclusions that all just come from, hey, it's a bad speaker. And
right.
It just doesn't work. So getting the frequency response of a speaker to be smooth should be easy, but there's still a lot of errors out there. I see speakers made by well-known manufacturers that are just not smooth in terms of response. So a smooth on-axis and off-axis should look like this, where this is the balance of frequencies versus level. This is what's called a frequency response. And when you look at the frequency, the speaker right on axis, it should send you sounds that are the same at the low frequency as the mid frequency as the high frequency, as long as what you're putting into the speaker is the same. And then there generally will be a generalized off-axis sound. It won't necessarily be exactly the same, but it should be a smooth replica of that.
So the blue line there is the off-axis sound.
Yep.
And the green line is the on-axis.
The on-axis sound.
Okay.
And just to confuse you, now I've changed it to the blue line being the axial sound and the red line being the off-axis sound.
All right.
On-axis should be smooth. Off-axis should be as smooth as possible.
Yep.
And there is a tolerable amount. Now, all speakers are going to have a variable dispersion. That is just how it is. At low frequency, they're going to radiate spherically in the room, like a pulsating sphere. They're putting sound in all directions. At the mid frequency, they're going to radiate sort of generally hemispherically forward. And at the high frequency, they're going to tend to radiate more directly towards the listener.
You cannot change the laws of physics.
Yeah, you cannot. Now, there are manufacturers these days making speakers in which a lot of effort is made so that the radiation between the mid and high frequency is constant. You can do that by special radiators. You can do it by using waveguides. My speaker company does that. They put tweeters inside our waveguides so that it essentially forces the radiation to be the same at the mids and highs. But generally speaking, they're going to want to focus in, and some amount of focus is okay. A lot of it is not, because there is a hot spot and you hear that. So ultimately, a real speaker is going to have directivity. It's going to have flat axial response, and the radiation will depend on frequency. But generally speaking, there's this concept called the sound power in speaker design, which is about what the net energy the speaker is putting in this, but the net energy the speaker's putting into the room. And it generally tends to look something like this with most speakers. And what you want to do is pick speakers in which the sound power is not, doesn't have too big of a set of accidents.
Not drooping anywhere.
By drooping too much or changing too much. This is measured using a spinorama response. Dr. Floyd Toole has that name. There's actually a more technical term, but you put a speaker in a test room and you spin it around and you measure at different points what it is, and you plot it out this way. So really quickly, here's 4 different speakers that are listened to in a consistent set of listening tests in an industry. Here's a Model A that has a reasonably flat frequency response and a reasonably flat power response in blue. Here's a Model B that has a reasonably flat frequency response on axis up here and a reasonably smooth sound power response. Here's a Model X that the frequency response ain't so good anymore, and the sound power is deviating quite a bit. And here's a speaker that's got
Holy smokes.
with a really bad frequency response.
Right.
Now, this speaker will generally sound good in most rooms. A speaker that has good axial response and a decent sound power. Okay. This speaker will also sound good in a room that has a decent frequency response and a good sound power. And, you know, a real speaker is going to have these differences of radiation response. The sound power is going to be tilted down. The question is, you don't want it to be tilted too far down. Now, getting it right, using EQ correct, is about starting with a speaker that has smooth direct sound and a smooth sound power, and then placing the speaker correctly in the room. Now, the biggest thing that a room is going to do to a speaker is it's going to affect its low frequency response way more than anything else. It's going to put peaks and dips in the response of the speaker. And that is really hard to correct with acoustics. You would need to put so much absorption that's really thick into the room to get rid of all these peaks and dips that the room's going to become anechoic at low frequency. Some of this gets corrected by placement. Some of it gets corrected by acoustical treatments, and some of it gets corrected by EQ. Placement. Here's some predictions of what happens to a speaker when you move it back and forth in a room. This is actually a model, a mathematical model. And as you're moving the speakers around in the room, you're changing the interaction between the speaker and this boundary and that boundary and how they cancel each other out. I don't have time to explain all the math behind that. But let me show you some charts for that. So this is a case study. This is brand new and fresh. I was at a mastering lab yesterday in Northern California. This is a room that's used for what's called mastering, which is the final step of producing a record album. Remember those things where you would put a bunch of songs together? And
I seem to have something. I seem to remember something about that.
Yeah. So this is a place where an engineer with really good ears listens to the 10 songs and balances them out so they all have about the same tone. They all sound good. They have the right amount of bass, mids, and highs. They have the right sound stage, and they all sound nice and continuous. And this is a room in which you want to hear reference quality sound, right? This room has plenty of absorption. I walked in. This is what I saw. Not enough bass absorption, and it had severe low frequency problems. Okay, lots of absorber panels, very good focal speakers over here.
What's that big glass window?
Yeah, well, what is that big glass window doing? Well, it's causing a bounce off the back of the speaker. So let's look at that. Here first is the reflection decay time of this room.
Whoa, you actually measured it?
I measured it. I went there yesterday with my microphones and all my equipment and measured it.
Yikes.
So this is showing us how the sound bounces around the room over time after it's left in this case, the left speaker. So this is the point at which I ask, hey, can we have another 5 minutes? Is that possible?
And did they give you then another 5 minutes?
No, this is the point at which I'm asking you, Scott. Can we have another 5 minutes?
Absolutely, we can have more. Yes, we can go over 1 hour, no problem.
Okay, this is the point at which I actually told the client, I'm going to need a little more time. This room has got some problems.
No, this is fascinating stuff, man. I don't want to stop you. We can go over, no problem.
All right, so let's get back to this graph. So what this is showing us, given the volume of this room and giving that equation, the 0.3 times the cube root of the volume of the room divided by 3,532.
Yep.
The decay time of the room should have been 0.3 seconds so that the average bear going in there after he's ate a bunch of honey goes, ooh, I really like the way Mahler's third is sounding in here. But instead, the decay time in the mid frequency. So this is actually showing by a measurement. I'll explain later if we have time how much time the sound takes to die out to nothing. And it's all the way down to 0.18, too short. On average at the mids and highs, it's too short. And then there's a bump at 300 hertz. Then there's a dip over here at 160 hertz. And then it bumps back up at 100 hertz and then dips back down. What that means is the sound that's put in the room from the speaker is returning back to the ears with Not a lot of mid-frequency, a bump around 300 hertz, and then a dip, and then a peak and a dip, and that's what you're hearing is a combination of that direct sound and all these reflections that are kind of twisting your sense of what's coming off these very good speakers.
How can you make a good record in a room like that?
It's very difficult. So to the defense of really good mastering and recording engineers, they get used to how bad their room sounds, and they work around it. They actually have listened to enough things in their room that they go, well, yeah, that's just my room, and then they work around it. I prefer to make my life easy and actually have a room that's tuned correctly.
No kidding.
So, yeah, it takes less time. You can, break and go play golf or whatever you like to do.
Right.
So let's look at the slides again. So the mid-frequency RDT is too short, the low-frequency RDT is too long, and there's severe low-frequency problems. Now, you can expand that view. I'm using, by the way, what's called Room EQ Wizard, which is a wonderful analysis program that you can download for free. The designer of it deserves an Oscar, or whatever would be the Oscar for audio engineering. Actually, there are several awards for how amazing this program is. If you use it and download it, please send him some money, $50, $100. Years ago, you'd have to spend $3,000 or $4,000 to buy software that does everything that this thing does. He deserves a donation. Room EQ Wizard, REW.
Yes, many AVS forum members use and cite that very program. So
absolutely,
you got a lot of adherents here on AVS forum. So in fact, AVS forum asked, "What was that diagram we just saw?" It's called a waterfall plot, and Anthony is going to explain what it does, what it means.
So a waterfall plot is what happens when you dampen the walls with a lot of water, and it shows how the water. Ah, man, I didn't think we were going to be using that joke like this many times.
This many times. It's a good joke,
Yeah. What do they call that in comedy? It's a recall or something. Anyway,
something like that, yeah.
So waterfall plot actually looks at that RDT measurement, but actually breaks it down over time. Actually shows you what's happening at high resolution in 10,000 different points. So rather than give you one number, it's showing you how long it takes at 1 kilohertz and what the shape of the curve is as it falls down. So red over here is 92 dB. Blue down here is 35 dB. That's about 60 dB difference. So that's how it falls off. And you can see that from the highest frequencies down to here, it's all looking about the same. These little ridges are noise. There's like ambient noise in the space. Something was happening, whatever. Ignore these ridges. Now, what's really fascinating about this is as you go down in frequency, there's some ridges that are starting to hang out longer, and a particularly bad one here at 47.8 hertz. That's obviously hanging a very long time. While all the other frequencies are falling off quickly, 47 hertz is hanging a long time. This room, when you sat there at the listening position, all that I heard, well, I heard a bunch of different things, but I heard a lot of like really low frequency. And so what does that do? So these are measurements in both of those are time domain measurements. They're showing you what's happening in time. Let's look at what's happening in frequency. This is the measured response of the left speaker averaged over 4 microphones around the mastering position. So overall, above 200 hertz, it ain't so bad. It's up and down within a 5 dB window, pretty reasonable. It'd be nice to smooth that out. But look at this. There's a peak here and a dip here. And that dip is 16 dB down from the average. And the peak is 7 dB up.
Right. So we're talking over 20 dB difference between the trough and the peak.
Correct. So 23 dB difference between here and here.
Yeah.
Not acceptable.
Yeah.
Can you equalize this? No.
What?
You can, if you had an EQ, you could make it less bad. Here's what I mean. You could pull these peaks down.
Yeah.
You could pull this peak down a little bit, not all the way down to the average. I actually put the cursor here at the average of the mids and highs. You could pull this peak down. You don't want to bring it all the way down. You bring it to about 3 or 4 dB up. But this is a result of a cancellation. It's actually signals going back and forth between the speaker and the window, and also because of standing waves along the width direction, it's a cancellation. And if you tried to put an EQ there to push it up, all you'd be doing is like blowing down the tube of a vacuum cleaner. You're not going to win. You're gonna end up running out of air.
Right.
So,
but that also depends on where you are and where the microphone is in
absolutely.
the room, right? Yeah.
So this is where we started. Okay.
Yeah.
And so if you were in a case where the client said, do not change anything, equalize it, gun to your head.
Yeah.
What I would do is I would pull these peaks down, pull that down, actually try to push some of this up to simulate that there's some bass around 80 hertz, but you're not going to fix it all. I would also look at what's going on here and here, see if the direct failed. So by bringing the microphone up closer to the speaker to see if that's just an accident or whatever it is, play with this a little bit, but there's not a lot needed up here. Okay. Now check it out. This client did not hold any guns to my head. He was like, what do we do? So it's like, well, let's spend a bunch of time. We spent 2 hours in the room listening here, listening there. And we said, like, would you mind if we moved your speakers around? Oh, okay. So here's what I did. And this is a great, cool trick. So this room has has a dip around close to 80 hertz. I dialed up 78 hertz, if I remember right. And I walked around the room and I listened for a null. There is a null about 20 inches to the left of the left speaker, standing wave null. If you put a speaker right in the null, it will actually reduce the efficiency of the standing wave. What? Well, a standing wave is a condition in which the sounds are bouncing back and forth. They're happy to be there. But right at the null, the sound actually wants to teeter-totter around a null.
Right.
And you can kind of hear it. If you move your head to right where the null is and you move back and forth, you'll notice that sense that it's out of phase. And I found a place there. It's like, let's try putting your left speaker here. Move it 20 inches this way. Now, I also noticed that you have a dip right at 75 hertz, which is the round trip between the back of the speaker, the window, and come back. Do you mind if we move the speaker relative to the window? Whatever, man, make it sound better. So we did that. And without applying any EQ, without changing anything, we went from this mess to this.
Yeah.
Which is still not perfect, but a whole lot better.
It's a lot better.
And it was free. It was free. Well, my time. He
Your
paid for my
time.
time
Yeah,
to be
but
there.
it didn't cost any.
Didn't cost him anything.
Processing power.
Right. Now we have. So we moved the speaker 20 inches to the left, 14 inches forward, as in towards the window. We now have a 9 dB dip at 90 hertz. I didn't mark the peak, but this is equalizable. As in, you can bring this down, you can bring that down, you can bring this little peak down, you can bring this up. You may not be able to bring it all of the way up, but you can bring it to a point where the sound is not totally screwed up. Okay? So that's where EQ can come in useful by acting judiciously. You like that word, judiciously?
I love that word. I use it all the time.
Be judicious.
Now let me ask you this. Moving the speaker, though, I mean, if you're a mastering engineer, you want your speakers to be in a certain configuration with your head. Typically, it would be an equilateral triangle.
Yep.
And you moving the speaker 20 inches this way and 14 inches this way, didn't that screw that up?
Well, let's see what happens when this is so great. By the way, you guys, we did not rehearse this.
No,
let's see what happened to the right speaker when we moved it 20 inches to the left and 14 inches forward. Thank you, Scott.
Man.
I always think that presentations are going great when people ask the question that I'm about to talk about.
About to answer. Yes, good.
So here's our right speaker at the beginning, in the beginning, 12 dB dip at 66 hertz, and then also a pretty bad dip at 95 hertz, 6 dB peak, still not acceptable. It's 18 dB. It's less bad than the left speaker. This is what we started with. And then moving the speaker 20 inches to the left, we ended up with this. So I know it's not as big of an improvement, but look at what we have here. I'm going to try to put my, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry, guys. Do you see my mouse now?
Yes.
Look at that.
Wow.
Big difference, right?
Fix that one dip.
So really that 66 hertz dip is largely fixed.
Yep.
And then the dip that was here at 95 is also substantially fixed. And this can be fixed with EQ. All right. So this is equalizable.
Yes.
Okay. And then I also have some responses of the two speakers together, which we'll move on. Let me switch gears to a totally different space. I realize I did not put a picture of this, but imagine a totally different room. This is a home cinema, open floor plan. So big, open, cavernous space, decent speakers laid around the room, some thin acoustical treatments placed here and there for good measure, but largely very reverberant. 16-foot, 14-foot ceilings with a clear story. Client calls me and goes, I've been trying to mess with this for a while and I just can't get it to sound right. All right, let me come on over. So I come on over and this is what I measure for the RDT.
Oh, man.
So given the volume of this room, the reflection decay time should have been down here at the line. And instead...
At all frequencies.
At all frequencies. And instead, it's up at 800 milliseconds or up to, 900 milliseconds in the mids and highs. And then it has this really weird low frequency loss.
Right.
What is going on here?
What is going on there?
Did he have a lot of bass absorption? No. So I see this a lot in open floor plan spaces. The mids stick around. They bounce around like ping pong balls just right where you are. And the lows expand like a big billowing smog machine would to the rest of the residence, to the rest down a hallway, over there to the dining room, to the kitchen, everywhere.
Up the stairs.
Up the stairs. So the lows dissipate quickly and the mids just all hang around going, You put a good speaker in there and guess what it's going to sound like? It's going to sound like this. And that's exactly what it sounded like. So this client says, no, we're not changing. We're not adding acoustic treatments here. Sorry. Can you make it work? Okay. So let's, bring out the equalizer and ended up. So mid-frequency RDT was too long. Low frequency was too short. Yep. It sounded mid-range. His very good speakers just sounded like bullhorns. Now, at the end of the time, by equalizing, I'm not showing you the EQ response, and I got another 32,000 slides to show you, but we'll stop here.
Yeah.
By knowing the RDT, and by knowing that, look, I'm going to have to equalize this against the RDT to an extent, and also listening to program material I knew, and by equalizing to an extent until it sounded reasonable, we got to a point where the guy's like, great, the dialogue sounds good. The effects sound good. The music sounds good. Yeah, it's a little wishy-washy. Maybe the separation is not quite as good as, maybe in a really, great room. But thank you very much. Here's your money. Get out of here. Thank you so much. I love it. Checks in the mail. And it worked. Much to everybody's surprise, including mine. So if you look back at the response curve over here, what I had to do, this is the measured response in the room where you can notice it's scalloped out in the mids, which is unusual. It actually
this is after your EQ.
This is the measured response of the center speaker that yielded reasonable sound. So scalloped out in the middle, pushed up in the top. We actually need a little bump over here to make the highs kind of be a little crispy, a little bit. That's what it took. Now, here's a little trick I use when I say by listening to it. I don't know where they are. I'm so sorry. Here's my little trick. So you can listen to program material and you listen to it and you go, well, I'm listening to my music and my movies and I don't know what it sounds like. I have this little trick. I have a pair of they're not called earbuds. I don't like calling them. They're transducers by a company called Etymotic, Etymotic. Yep. I do not get paid for promoting them.
Right.
They make an earphone you plug into your ear that's incredibly smooth response. It's actually compensated for what's called head related transfer function, HRTF, and you basically push sound directly to your ear canal. Either pink noise or music that from your source.
I don't call them earbuds either. I call them in-ear monitors.
In-ear monitors, yep.
IEMs.
IEMs. And these are particularly good. They're a little expensive. It's called the ER4S. They're a little hard to find, but they're really amazing. And you listen with those and you pull them out and you listen to the speakers and you push them back in and you do a comparison until you go, well, now it's starting to sound about the same. And the reason to do that in a room like this is what the microphone's going to measure is not really what you're going to hear because it's measuring linearly,
Right.
and the human brain, your brain is listening non-linearly. It's listening to
Right.
the direct sound first, and at some frequencies, it's focusing on this and that and this and that, and you can end up with a measurement that shows on an analyzer that shows that it's nice and smooth and it sounds bad.
Mm-hmm.
So people criticize equalization because it didn't work. Well, it didn't work because you're measuring with a linear device while the ear brain of a human being is nonlinear.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to work judiciously. This is the point at which I mentioned that auto EQ generally listens linearly. It does a thing to produce a target curve, assuming that you have decent speakers with decent frequency response and decent sound power. So the bubble of sound it's putting into the room is smooth overall.
Mm-hmm.
And then it assumes that what the room is returning back to your ears is smooth overall. And then it draws a target curve in its little computer brain to make it work. And if you have all those conditions, it will work pretty well. If you do not have those conditions, if you have speakers that don't have an even sound power and a room that does not have an even reflection decay time with frequency, it's going to try to it's basically going to try to put the same suit on everybody. Everybody gets the same blue suit, same size.
Right.
And from maybe looking at me that my suit and Scott's suit may be a little different in size.
I should say.
And so just a little bit, like maybe, a little nip and tuck here. And
or maybe more than a little bit.
Maybe a little bit. So the thing I have not had much success with automatic equalization schemes is that they make, I think, a little bit too much of an assumption about what the speaker is and what the room is. If you have control,
plus the fact that they're listening to a microphone.
Correct.
Which is not the same as listening to your
Correct.
ears. And
Correct.
by auto EQ, you're talking about things like, and I'm not trying to disparage or promote any of them, but like Odyssey, like Dirac, like Yamaha's YPAO, or Sony has one. I mean, there are a bunch of different ones.
There's a bunch of different schemes out there.
Mm-hmm. But they're all listening with a microphone.
They're listening with a microphone without the really strange nonlinear character of the ear brain of the psychoacoustic system of a human being.
Right.
Now, some of them do give you the ability to manipulate the target curve, where it did this thing thinking you needed a blue suit of a certain size. You go, no, I need a brown suit in a different size. And you can go in there and modify the target curve until it sounds good. That's good. Mm-hmm. I find that using a manual EQ, a microphone, Room EQ Wizard, you can buy a USB microphone from Parts Express, the UMM6, that's $100 or $80. Get a boom microphone so you can actually move it around the room. Learn to use Room EQ Wizard, and get one of the not so expensive digital EQs out there that are also available from Parts Express. There's a really good EQ called the Mini DSP as one of them. Another one, the other one is I forget the model number, but it's in the Dayton audio line. It's a 4X8 or something like that. Doesn't cost a lot of money, and you sit there and you dial up the EQ until you get a good target curve and until it sounds good. And I usually find that it takes just as long to do a manual dial up of EQ as it does to manipulate an auto EQ over and over and over and over again until it gives you the right result. Right. Odyssey, you can also, there's an application runs on iOS and on Windows where you can actually go in and modify it. So just go, no, this is the target curve I need. Well, again, when I've used that, I find that the iterations it takes just as long as doing a manual EQ.
Doing it manually.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
wow.
Anyway, the conclusion of all this is that really, if you want good sound, you want to do both. You want to do. I'm looking for a slide that concludes it, and I probably won't find one, so forget it. Actually, while we're here, let me show you diffusers. This is a thing that's often misunderstood. Low frequency observed diffusers. What do diffusers look like? So, here's some pictures of some diffusers. I know you guys are probably getting completely nauseated here.
No, not a chance, man. This is all fascinating stuff.
So diffusers. Generally, there's a category of diffusers that work through diffraction. They're sometimes called QRD diffusers, and at a certain frequency range, the sound resonates inside the little well of the diffuser and scatters out. There's other types. So this is a diffuser from RPG. There's another one called a bicubic diffuser by RPG. These are very good. They work superbly well. And, they can look like cylindrical shapes, slotted shapes. This is what I call 2D diffusers. This is what I call 3D diffusers, either a pyramid or these things with these blocks that stick out in all directions.
At different depths.
Different depths. So you want those things to be preferably at least 4 inches deep, if not 6 inches, because that's what it takes to cover a wide enough range of frequencies. So enough of all this. But what I'm going to say, or we'll go a cappella. What I'm going to say is ultimately your goal, I'm going to assume, is you want good sound. And you're yes. And good sound meaning clear dialogue, even sounding music, good separation between elements in the front and the side and the back.
Right.
Good bass. Everything feels like, man, I'm in this music or I'm in this movie. And really, my preaching is going to be, in order to get there, you need to do some amount of acoustical tuning, which is, 15% of absorption, 15% of diffusion, some low frequency absorption. You want to choose good speakers that you place in the room so that there isn't these big severe accidents. And I showed you just by the way, Scott, I was like, man, I'm going to have to find a measurement set that I have from a room I've done somewhere along the way that shows. And yesterday, in like thinking through this,
just
it's like
yesterday.
It was like just yesterday. It happened. It happens all the time. So move your speakers around a little bit, and suddenly you can make them a whole lot less bad. So choose good speakers with even frequency response, even sound power. Place them in the room to where their interactions with the rooms are mitigated, and then equalize what's left.
Right.
Okay? That's kind of my view about it.
That's
one little thing is, how do you know the frequency response and sound power response of a speaker? Well, very few are the manufacturers that bother giving that to you in their spec sheets. Very few, unfortunately. You will see more of this. I'm working on a committee within the CD Association to standardize the disclosure of all of this so you can look at it. But if you look around, you will start to see more and more manufacturers in the specialty side that disclose that. Right?
Those the only way to know, unless you buy one and measure it yourself.
You could. So I'm not going to do it. There's another forum out there that's maybe well known to your readership where they actually measure speakers for people. You can send them a speaker and they'll measure them. They'll publish their response, axial response, and sound power, and all the things you want. That's really cool because it's independent of the manufacturer. There's no trickery. It's done by a very serious engineer using very good equipment, and that's really cool.
And very good methodology as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Well, this has been super interesting and very informative. I know a lot of people in the chat are impressed. Papalock85 says, "Love your work, AG."
Thank you.
So, and I do too. I want to mention that if you are a little overwhelmed by all of this and you want to hire somebody to do it for you, Anthony's your guy. And using PMI Engineering, I think, would be the company that you would contact for that. If you wanted to buy some acoustic treatments, your company, what is it called?
MSR Acoustics
MSR.
is the corporation.
Acoustics,
We have two brands, Dimension 4, because acoustics is the fourth dimension. And Sonatus is another brand. Sonatus is more kind of direct to consumer, and the Dimension 4 stuff is a little more expensive, takes a little bit more consultative sale. But both solutions exist. Okay. I will be fair, and I'll also say, because I believe in being fair, that there's other manufacturers of good acoustical materials. Make sure they give you the data. So on our website, you'll see all the absorption and diffusion coefficients. Make sure that whatever you're picking, you get the data from the manufacturer, be it speakers, be it treatments. There's also other good design firms out there. And if you're really serious about what you're doing, you could either learn all this stuff. It's taken me 20, 30 years to maybe start to understand it. You can either learn it or you can hire a firm, especially one, if you're into this, you can actually hire a firm that will tell you what they're doing. When I work with clients that are in this forum, I know they're interested, and I'll spend time explaining what we did.
What
And
you're
people,
doing.
oh, that's so cool! You did this, you did that.
Yeah.
So,
Some clients, I'm sure, are just do it. I don't care how it's done, just do it. Right?
leave me alone. Yeah.
Leave me alone. I'll be back in 3 hours.
Yeah.
Right, whatever. But also, I want to make sure everybody understands that not only do you make acoustic treatments and sell them and offer engineering consulting, you also make speakers.
Yeah.
From the company Grimani Systems. And I will tell you this, I have heard these speakers, and they're some of the best demos of speakers at CEDIA and at your facility there. Some of the best demos I've ever heard. They are wonderful speakers.
Thank you.
And you're not paying me to say that either.
Now I owe you a coffee or something.
Now you do. Well, since we don't live too far from each other anymore, I hope to get together and do exactly that. But
I'll meet you at Alice's restaurant. You can get anything you want there.
yeah, that's right. Excellent. We shall do that. But I will say that the speakers, your speakers that I have heard are just wonderful. They sound fantastic.
Thank
so
you.
I do encourage people, if you're in the market for speakers, to go check them out.
Thank you.
They're really good. So you're covering the gamut here, and it's very impressive. And Ted Taylor says, great job. You're an excellent teacher. And
Thank you, Ted.
I absolutely agree 100%. Sonic Cinema is asking, do you recommend acoustic simulation software for designing home theater acoustics?
Ah, boy.
Do you have another hour?
Unfortunately, nobody that I have found so far, nobody's really written the piece of software that's going to do all of that stuff. From standing wave predictions through reflection decay, all of the things you need to know. I'm very disappointed that this far into our industry, there isn't a definitive solution. There is a thing called a cinema designer that was designed in and around CEDIA. It does some good things. There are other predictive acoustic systems like CARA, C-A-R-A. By and large, the majority of the acoustic simulation software is made for big room acoustics, and the general characteristics there are kind of different in the simulations. So, maybe one day I'll retire from this job and I'll write a simulation package for
small
that.
rooms.
I wish such a thing existed.
Right.
I'll just mention that when we do design work, we use this intense Excel spreadsheet that like really reaches the edge of what Excel can do with all this math and simulation. And it's not something I can put in anybody's hands because you would just get lost inside it.
Sure.
I get lost inside it. And so there are ways to predict and simulate all these things. There just isn't one that I've seen out there that's just like easy, like, that you could actually make an application for your phone.
Right.
I wish it did exist.
Right. Bruce Reese is asking, are your acoustic products also available in Europe? Big fan of you both.
So absolutely. So Sonatus is a company based out of Croatia. We are the importers for the United States and Mexico and Central America. But if you're in Europe, the same products you can get from sonatusacoustic.eu. Just look it up. They're in Croatia and they have distributors in most countries.
Okay, cool. Jimmy at first said Ondo, the book that you mentioned, out of print and therefore super expensive. And then somebody else mentioned that I was somewhat wrong. Ondo is back on Alibris, Alibris, for around $100.
Oh,
so
okay.
You could get that book if you want. Okay, well, listen, we've gone over time, and I'm perfectly happy to do so because it's been really, really instructional and informational and a lot of fun too. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks for allowing me to just ramble on.
Oh man, that's the best kind of podcast guest in my business.
Excellent.
So thank you again to Anthony Grimani for his wonderful presentation here and great conversation. And I hope to see you all in the new year. I hope you all have a wonderful New Year celebration. And next we meet, we will be talking about CES. So I do hope you will join us. Until then, geek out.
Geek out.